Good day, everyone. Today, I'm gonna tackle about the agreement and peace between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. The government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, herein referred to as the parties to this agreement, determined to establish a peaceful environment and a normal condition of life in the Bangsamoro homeland, reaffirming the general cessation of hostilities dated on July 18, 1997, and the general framework of the agreement of intent signed between the parties on August 27, 1998, and committing to reach a negotiated political settlement of the Bangsamoro problem and enduring peace and stability in Mindanao, recalling the Tripoli Agreement of 1976 and the Jakarta Accord of 1996 between the Government of the Republic of the Philippines or the GRP and the Moro National Liberation Front or the MNLF, and the OIC resolution on November 12, 2000 of the ninth session of the Islamic Summit Conference in Doha State of Qatar, urging the GRP and the MILF to promptly put an end to armed hostilities and to pursue peace talks towards finding a peaceful resolution to the existing problem in Mindanao. Noting that the basic elements and or principles for the resumption of peace or peace talks between the MILF and the GRP panels have been facilitated by the government of Malaysia as set forth in the agreement on the general framework for the resumption of peace talks between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, signed on March 24, 2001 in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, further recalling Article 6 of the said agreement of the general framework for the resumption of the peace talks between the GRP and the MILF, signed in Kuala Lumpur, to undertake relief and rehabilitation measures for the evacuees and joint development projects in the conflict-affected areas, and recognizing that peace negotiations between the GRP and the MILF is for the advancement of the general interest of the Bangsamoro people and other indigenous people, and recognizing further the need of the comprehensive and lasting political settlement of the conflict in Mindanao. The parties welcome the resumption of the peace talks and consequently have agreed as follows. So there are 5 agreements on peace between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. The first agreement is security aspect. In accordance with the incremental characteristic of peace process and agreement of the general framework for the resumption of the peace talks, the parties, as represented by their respective peace panels, consider that normalization in conflict-affected areas can be achieved if certain principles and guidelines of conduct and action are adhered to by the parties. So these are: first, all past agreements of the parties shall be implemented in accordance with the agreement of the general framework for the resumption of the peace talks, signed in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia on March 24, 2001 for the progressive resolution of the Bangsamoro problem with honor, justice, and integrity for all sectors of society. The second one is the negotiation of peaceful and resolution of the conflict must involve consultation with the Bangsamoro people free from any imposition in order to provide chances of success and open new formulas that permanently respond to the aspiration of the Bangsamoro people for freedom. The third one, The parties agreed to invite representatives of the Organization of Islamic Conference or the OIC to observe and monitor the implementation of all GRP-MILF agreements. The parties further agreed to strengthen the GRP-MILF agreement on the general cessation of hostilities dated on July 18, 1997. Upon signing this agreement, a monitoring team shall be constituted with the representatives from the OIC. The second agreement is rehabilitation aspect. The observance of international humanitarian law and respect for internationally recognized human rights instrument and the protection of evacuees and displaced persons in the conduct of their relations reinforce the Bangsamoro people's fundamental right to determine their own future and political status. The MILF shall determine, lead, and manage rehabilitation and development projects in conflict-affected areas except when public funds are involved, in which cases government procedures and rules will be observed. The parties shall be safely return evacuees to their place of origin, provide all the necessary financial or material and technical assistance to start a new life, as well as allow them to awarded reparation for their properties lost or destroyed by reason of conflict. In order to pave the way for relief and rehabilitation of evacuees and implementation of development projects in the areas affected by the conflict, the parties agreed to implement the GRP-MILF agreement on the general cessation of hostilities dated on July 18, 1997. The third agreement is ancestral domain aspect. On the aspect of ancestral domain, the parties, in order to address the humanitarian and economic needs of the Bangsamoro people and preserve their social and cultural heritage and inherent right over their ancestral domain, agree that the same be discussed further by the parties in their next meeting. The fourth agreement is the activation of committees. Immediately upon signing of this agreement, the parties hereby agree to activate working committees for the purpose of discharging their mandates, particularly the implementation of all agreements between the parties. The fifth and last agreement is the acknowledgement. The parties acknowledge the leadership of President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo in pursuing an all-out peace policy in Mindanao. The parties expressed their collective appreciation and gratitude to the great leader of the great socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, Colon El Muammar Gaddafi, and to the chairman of the Gaddafi International Foundation for the Charitable Association, si Saif Islam Gaddafi, for hosting the formal opening of the resumption of the GRP-MILF peace talks in Tripoli, Libya, to His Excellency Dato Sri Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Prime Minister of Malaysia, and His Excellency Abdurrahman Wahid, President of the Republic of the Indonesia, for their full and continuing support. This agreement was done on this 22nd day of June 2001. So that could be all the end of my assignment.
So let's talk about Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro. Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro is a final peace agreement signed between the government of the Philippines and the More Islamic Liberation Front on March 27, 2014. At the Malacañang Palace in Manila. And under the agreement, the Islamic Separate would turn over their firearms to a third party, which would be selected by the rebels, and the Philippines government, the MILF, agreed the commission its armed wing, and the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces. In return, the government would establish an autonomous Bangsamoro power sharing was a central point to the autonomy redesign. In addition, the current arm a character lists 14 areas that are outside the powers of the regional legislature. In this comprehensive peace agreement, the parties list 81 powers categorized into reserve for the central government, exclusive to the Bangsamoro, and concurrent with or shared by the two sides for power sharing. Out of 81 powers, 58 are developed to the Bangsamoro and 9 are reserved to the central government and the 14 are shared. Though combined, the strength of these two rebel forces has not reached a point of posing any real threat to the government in Manila, their existence and the reasons for their silence certainly brings many headaches for the government. For nearly 5 decades, 5 presidents have tried to complete and these two rebellions, utilizing both force and diplomacy. So far, no combination has succeeded. Perhaps the most remarkable effort to bring closure to these movements was that of the Ramos administration, which tried to reach out to both the communists and Muslim rebels through peaceful means. There were many efforts to reach peace with the Islamic separatists. So as we observe about the situation before, the situation before between the Muslim Filipinos, also known as MILF, Bangsamoro people of Mindanao, especially in Kam territory and the Arm region, experiencing a lot of difficulties and struggling and fighting for the rights of Muslim people. Muslim Filipinos rooting for the peace, equal treatment, rights, assets, properties that took by the government that Muslim Filipinos owned and deserve. Now all praise is to pray that the answer of all Muslim in Philippines has finally came and learning for the peaceful living. And the agreement between the government and the Moros has a big impact to the lives of Muslim Filipinos. When our PRRD signed the peace of negotiation, an agreement and the Bangsamoro Basic Law, the arm because a Bangsamoro autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao and has its own running government composed of different ministries, spearheaded by the brilliant and religious courageous and leader. So now let's proceed to framework agreement. So on October 15, 2012, the Philippine government signed a much hyped document touted as the Framework Agreement on the Bangsamoro, which culminated to the Aquino administration effort to end deadlock and the peace process. This new document, while merely providing for the general framework for actual peace negotiation, announced the status quo and unacceptable and that Bangsamoro shall be established to replace the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. So the Bangsamoro was the new autonomous political entity referred to in decision points of principle as of April 2012. So according to President Aquino, this was the agreement that could finally seal genuine, lasting peace in Mindanao. So with Bangsamoro replacing ARM, which was described by President Benigno Aquino as a failed experiment. So in reaching agreement, the peace talks between the MILF and the Philippine government had been brokered by Malaysia since 1997. So after 2009, The negotiations were also supported by International Contact Group, or what we call the ICG. The ICG represented an innovation and peace process support, and that it was hybrid body composed of both states, international and non-government organizations. So the members were Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and United Kingdom and Japan and the Asia Foundation and the Century of the Humanitarian Dialogue and Mohammedia and the Constellation's Resources. When the Asia Foundation became an official member of the third party monitoring team in 2012, and the community of San Egidio from Italy replaced the Asia Foundation and the ICG. So on June 24, 2014, the Philippines government chief negotiator Miriam Coronel Ferrer and MILF chief negotiator Mohagher Iqbal signed a peace agreement in Kuala Lumpur. The agreement would pave the way for the creation of the new Muslim autonomous entity called Bangsamoro. Under a law to be approved by the Philippine Congress, the government aims to set up the region by 2016. The agreement calls for Muslim self-rule in parts of the southern Philippines in exchange for the activations of rebel forces by the MILF. MILF forces would turn over their firearms to a third party to selected by the MILF and the Philippines government. A regional police force would be established, and the Philippine military was reduce the presence of troops and help disband private armies in the area. So in the agreement, the government committed to change a 37-year autonomy experiment whose current version and the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao has failed to live up to the Moro people's aspiration for freedom from highly centralized government. So we talk about the final peace agreement. So with the final peace agreement, with the NNLF signed on September 2, 1996 in Manila. So Philippines, the agreement effectively ended the Moro National Liberation Front rebellions against the Philippines government, Memorandum of Agreement, Ancestor Domain, Bangsamoro, Juridical Entity. That's all. Thank you.